Welcome to the YHA Outdoor Citizens and All the Elements Resilient Communities Series event, which is a mouthful, which is event organisation with the amazing Bex Band. I'm not going to talk very much today. I'm going to pass over almost immediately to Bex. So if you do not know Bex, Bex is a twice author. Do you say twice author or double author? Just thinking about it. Adventurer and the founder of Love Her Wild, which is an amazing online and offline community of women in the outdoors. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Bex.
Thank you. Thanks, Soraya. Okay, I'm going to start off. Let me just share my screen. I've already spoken to Sidra before running this session and spoken to her about her community and event that she wants to put on. But before we go into more details into the event planning, I wanted to do a bit of an introduction to me and also Love Her Wild, just to give you a bit more of an overview. And I'll try and put as many useful nuggets of information in there as well. Although we're talking about event planning, obviously when you're building a community, there's so many different aspects involved that, there's other, when it comes to questions and things, if there's other things you want to know or other things I can help with, please don't hold back. I will start with introducing myself, and then I'll get once I finish that, get Sidra to introduce her and her event, and then I will talk a little bit more about the process of event planning, the different stages, which really starts with the planning stage, and then a little bit about delivery, what do you do post event, and then also finish with a Q&A. So I like to always have some kind of message or something to think about whenever I give a talk. And I really like this image. This is from a blog called Wait But Why. If you don't already follow him, I would highly suggest going and getting on his newsletter. He doesn't write blog posts often, but when he does, they're always really incredible and really thought-provoking. And I like this. So this is like an image of your life so far and your life ahead of you. And you can see, if you look back, you can see all these paths that you've missed out, and obviously the route that you've decided to take. But what's nice is then to look ahead of you, and you've got so many options and so many different ways that your life could take you, and different paths that you could choose. But I actually don't think this is very representative of most people if they think about their life and the options ahead of them. And I actually think this is more an accurate representation of most people, and the options and their paths that lay ahead, because we all have these self-limiting beliefs. And when you live with self-limiting beliefs, they stop you from taking opportunities or perhaps pursuing things that you would otherwise do if you could break through those. And so my story, really getting to where I am now with Love Her Wild and other things that I've done on this journey, was really about me smashing those self-limiting beliefs. And once you've smashed them, it's like a muscle. Like the more you stretch yourself, the more you put yourself out there, the easier it becomes the next time you do something. And actually this is very relevant to event planning, because I think of all the different stages of setting up and running Love Her Wild, doing an event is absolutely petrifying, because it's in real life, it's happening in real time, it's very tangible. So it's very obvious that things go wrong or people don't show up. And it's really scary. There's loads that can go wrong. You can lose money, you can make a disaster of the schedule, you can turn up on event day and all sorts of things can happen. So to be really successful at running events, you've got to smash those self-limiting beliefs. And I know I'm talking to all sorts of people that run amazing communities. So all of you have already taken steps on putting yourself out of the comfort zone. So you've got to keep going with that. So let's go back a little bit on my journey. And really it began in 2016. Before that, I was living in London, and I tried all sorts of different jobs. I kept switching from jobs, from fundraising to teaching to working in admin, for a tour company, all sorts of different stuff. and I couldn't find work that was satisfying, and was feeling this real lack of fulfillment with my life. And on a bit of a whim, I decided with my husband to hike the Israel National Trail. So it's 1,000 kilometers in length. I come from a very outdoorsy background. I grew up in Basingstoke. My parents don't do anything outdoorsy. They think walking to the corner shop rather than taking the car counts as an adventure. So I was really new to the outdoor and adventure world, but threw myself into doing this hike. It was really hard. I was really unfit, and obviously learned a lot on the way. But it was this incredible experience. And, you know, I give talks about just doing this hike, and really just, I had to include it because this is really where my journey started, in terms of thinking up the idea for Love Her Wild. Because to prepare for the hike, I started going on courses and joined a number of outdoor groups so that I can learn useful things like how to pitch tent or how not to get lost when you're in the desert. And almost entirely, I found that I was the only woman whenever I signed up to a course or joined a club. And that in itself didn't bother me, except it became very evident very quickly that I was often like treated quite differently because I was a woman. And it was probably the first time, it was while on doing one of the courses, it was probably the first time in my life that I've experienced really obvious overt sexism. And it was really off-putting. And I found the whole scene to be very judgmental and very competitive, very masculine. And it really turned me off. And actually, if I hadn't already committed to doing this hike, I have a feeling I might just have like stepped away from doing the whole outdoors adventure thing, and kind of given up on it. But thankfully, I had this hike to do. And while I was there, I realized how amazing it is getting outdoors, how great going on adventures is. And it became like this big passion of mine in life. And while I was hiking in the desert, I had this idea to set up a Facebook group to try and connect with other women that like getting outdoors. And I came up with the name Love Her Wild. And that was really where the idea for the community stemmed from. At that point, you know, I didn't really know, I didn't sit down, didn't have a business plan, and never in a million years would have imagined that it got to the scale that it is today. It was just this idea that I had. And the other amazing thing that happened on the ventures, as you all know, when you get outdoors, is that it boosts your confidence, it boosts self-limiting beliefs, and it gives you this great sense of, you know, it's great can-do attitude and this belief in your own abilities. So those two things combined meant that when I finished this trek, I went straight to launching this group, Love Her Wild. And as I mentioned, it was just a Facebook group, that was it. And came up with a logo, stuck that on, came up with a name, and started sharing. And I began in the beginning just sharing in other groups. So, you know, any other outdoor groups I was in, I said, you know, I started this group. If there's any women that like getting outdoors or are interested with connecting with other women, you can join. And that was it. And I just wanted to mention this other side of what I do, because I'm not really going to go into detail in this talk, but actually it's really quite important. Alongside growing Love Her Wild, I've also had my own brand, as like Bex Band, my own personal brand. And I think that's been really beneficial, to have that alongside Love Her Wild. I think it really helped me in terms of, you know, giving interviews, giving talks. I became very much, in the beginning, I was very much the face of Love Her Wild. I'm trying very hard to like separate myself, and hopefully I'm being successful in that the community is growing as an entity on its own. And while I'll always be the founder, no one can take that away from me, I want to be separate from it because I think the community is bigger than me. So alongside growing the community, I carried on doing my own adventures, doing like sponsored adventures. That's me kick scooting length of America, in case you're wondering. Giving talks, doing interviews, going on podcasts, and then I published my first book, Free Strike South, and my second one's just come out, which is more relevant. I probably should have put that photo. That one's called Gather, and that's about building online communities. And I also did interviews with other community leaders And I got my third book next year coming out, which is about family adventures. And it's really benefited Love Her Wild because they support each other. So as I get more attention or do some kind of press, I'm always talking about Love Her Wild, and that brings like a stream of people to Love Her Wild. But it's also, I feel like as founders and community leaders, you invest so much into your community, and you will, for most people, you will have an endpoint. And I think if you build that brand alongside your community, when you have that endpoint, you don't lose all the hard work you put into it, because you can take your platform and you can kind of pivot and go in a different direction. So I launched Love Her Wild, and then this flurry of activity happened. Hundreds of women joined. Everyone was chatting, sharing, saying how amazing it was. And I knew pretty early on that I wanted to organise a women's only adventure. I actually really craved, when I was doing the Israel National Trail, it took about 2 months to do the whole hike. I didn't meet a single woman who was doing the trail in 2 months. So by the time I reached the south section, I was just really missing chatting to a woman and being around women. So I thought, do you know what? I really want to go on another adventure after this, so I don't get expedition blues. And wouldn't it be great to get like a team together? So I put this out in the Facebook group, and I came up with this idea called Everest Adventure, where we'd get a small group of women and we'd try to climb the height of Everest over 5 days. And I did it as an application, so women could apply to join, and they could say why they wanted to be part of it. I got sponsorships, so they didn't have to pay for anything. We got kit, which is why we all looked like snowmen. It was like the jackets that they couldn't sell. And oh my goodness, I had like an overwhelming response. I thought I'd get, I was really worried no one would apply, and I ended up with like over 100. So trying to whittle it down was really hard. And we went on this adventure. I had got my expedition leader qualification, which was one of the best things I did, because it enabled me to get out there and to organize these events directly myself. And we didn't achieve our goal in climbing Everest. In fact, we didn't really get that close to Everest at all. And I remember thinking, I don't know, on like day 3 or day 4, that this is an absolute disaster. This is like my first event. I've just launched Love Her Wild. No one's ever going to want to go on an adventure with me again. And then when we came back from that expedition, I was amazed by the response that we got. And Trail Magazine ran this big feature. A couple of other press people were like interested in covering the story, and all of them said it's so refreshing to have an adventure story or an adventure happen where you didn't reach your goal, but you come away buzzing from it, because we had such a good time. We made such good friends, and I felt like actually that was a stronger message than if we had gone and just achieved it. And all the women that were following us in the Facebook group just only had positive things to say. And we're going on about how amazing it was following us, and how inspiring it was that even though we didn't reach our goal, we kept going and we just did the best we could. And actually this formed the ethos for Love Her Wild. And I realized that actually what makes us stand out and what makes us different is that rather than focusing on the goal or reaching the height of Everest, what we focused on was being a really good team, looking out for each other, having a really good time along the way. And it sounds like, if you start running tours and adventures and you tell people, we're going to go climb this mountain, but we actually don't care whether we reach the summit or not, but I promise we're going to have a good time on the way, you think people wouldn't sign up to it. But actually the opposite is true, because really via our surveys that we do in Love Her Wild, the biggest thing that comes up is a lack of confidence and a worry that you're going to hold, it's especially true for women, that you're going to hold the rest of the team back. And so actually by taking that pressure away, we were really hitting our target audience. So from there, Love Her Wild snowballed. And, the Facebook group kept going. We're like past, I took this day, so 32,000 members in our main group. The profile of Love Her Wild continued to expand in like media interest, interviews, awards, podcasts, collaboration. I then registered it as a not-for-profit. when I realized just how big it was getting, and how, you know, being a registered nonprofit can open up more opportunities, such as funding. But it also felt like the right thing to do, especially when we started to bring on board volunteers. And I wanted to really protect their investment in the community. And then in 2020, two things happened. The first was we started establishing sub-communities. So we now have 40 sub-communities across the UK. They cover all mainland UK. So we have, for example, a Bristol Love Her Wild group, a West Wales Love Her Wild group, and they're all run by volunteers. And they vary. So we have some volunteers that have just created these communities in their own right, and they have absolute armies. And then they have a second layer. We call our top tier volunteers local wilders. They're the ones that are in charge of the local groups, and then below them there are wild volunteers, so they can then recruit further volunteers to help them. And some of them are just like insane. They're super active, loads going on. And then we have other ones where they're very quiet. So we continue to invest in our communities, because what we want is for them all to be these big super armies and communities in their own right. And in those, there's last time I looked, maybe like 45-50,000 women in those sub communities. So we need to do a bit of work to like drive them to our main Facebook group, which is like our hub. But I'll add that to the ever-growing to-do list. And then the second thing that happened in 2020 was just before COVID hit. I've timed this beautifully. I actually had a birthday celebration for Love Her Wild, because we were turning, well, I can do the maths, 3. So for the 3rd birthday party, I was like, I want a birthday cake. I want to celebrate everything that's happened with Love Her Wild. So I organised this weekend. And the best thing I did was to get feedback from the people that came were people that have helped me grow the community, done a bit of volunteering, had invested in it in various ways. And the biggest feedback that everyone told me was that you need to get someone on board to help. And I think when you're running something, it wasn't that I didn't think anyone could do it any better than me. It was more that like I felt bad, like it was my thing, and I felt bad for asking, and why would anyone want to help me? But I listened to everybody, and I brought on board my first staff member, and now we've got 11. Everybody works part-time, including myself. And we all work flexibly and remotely from all over the UK, and that has been a massive game changer. And although we still have a huge number of volunteers, I think, we must be in the hundreds with our volunteers, bringing the staff on board has meant that we've really been able to up our efforts in terms of the initiatives we do, providing funding and gear for women, and things like that. And we've also got a different income streams. So the biggest one is running trips, and in the UK and overseas. We also have Patreon, which is like a subscription or membership that members can pay for. And then our smallest income really is from funders. We've relied on that more the last couple of years with COVID, cost of living crisis and things like that. But we try and be as self-sustaining as much as possible. I think it's a really good place to get to as a community. And then just to bring it back to events, so, you know, I started organising the events myself, and then wanted to do bigger, more exciting adventures that were out of my remit to organise. So I began working with other companies, and they would organise the trip, they would take payments, they had all the insurers, and it was always on the basis that we would get one free place for either myself or someone else who would be the Love Her Wild representative to make sure our ethos was being met. And then we would take a commission per booking. And then I did that for, I guess, a couple of years, a year and a half, before I realized that actually I think I'm ready to start running these bigger adventures myself. And the biggest drive for that was often other people would deliver it, and I would just think I can do this better, or they haven't quite, you know, we're doing this day and it would be so much better for the women if we were doing this. So I wanted to take back control to make adventures the best that they could be. And then, yeah, I wanted to mention the end-to-end relay, because this is an event I organised last year. It was meant to happen in 2020, 1st of April 2020, which wasn't a good day for an event to start. So it was postponed multiple times. like never in a million years did I think I would be confident or capable enough to organize an event on this scale. But the women's end-to-end relay was a hiking relay. It took 74 days, and we passed the baton, that baton there in that picture, the full length of the UK. And each day, groups of women like these ones here would meet and carry the baton through to the next day, where the next team would meet the baton and then take it to the next day, and so on and so forth, until we'd cover the whole country. So it was an epic thing to organize. It's basically like organizing a day hike times 74 without a break in between. And yeah, I got here really by, you know, starting with that little Everest adventure with just a few women, and then each time taking steps to get bigger and bigger until I was at a space where I could do this. So let's go to event planning. Let me stop sharing, and then Sidra, I'll pass over to you if that's all right. And I'll let Sidra introduce her community and also talk about her events, but specifically the event that she wanted to plan for next year.
Thank you, Bex. That was really inspiring to hear your journey. So I started Climbers in 2021 to address the lack of diversity in climbing walls. We are just over 2 years old, which is absolutely amazing. We have had over 400 women try climbing. We have about 100 women in a WhatsApp group. We have socials up north as well. So it's really expanded, which is really lovely. So Bex and I worked on a trip for a funding that I received for the following year. And we have I have done trips recently outdoors, and it was just talking about challenges that I faced as an organizer, sort of my insecurities around that. We talked, and I was just fine tuning it and really focusing on the things that I wanted to achieve for the next trip, and really build that community atmosphere. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Bex has to say on this.
Great, thank you. And could you also just give a bit more context about what it was that you had in mind? So it's a weekend
Yes,
event.
so it's a weekend away next year, possibly in Portland, possibly somewhere else. But Portland's a very good destination because it's really accessible. And the plan is to have, I can't remember how many numbers we talked about. I think it might have been about 10 people possibly, and get them climbing outdoors, as well as expanding their skill set. So it's taking people who've never climbed outdoors, as well as taking people who do climb, and really expand their skills. And what's been wonderful about some of the trips that we've run recently, especially the one that we did recently last week actually, none of those people had actually been outside, and it was their first trip outside, and it was just a lovely experience for them to have. So the idea is to really fine tune things and just carry that on.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to talk through the different stages of organizing an event. And actually, Sidra's done some events already, and has done like an amazing job and already knows some of this. But actually, I think the most interesting thing that we spoke about was your challenges. So I'll kind of finish on challenges and share those if that's all right. But you know, like the first thing when you decide an event and you've got your vision, is really you've got to start getting organized quite early on and work out what the stages are of things that you need to do. But we talked about insurance, which is such a big thing, and obviously comes up a lot. And it's a whole topic in itself. I know it's discussed quite a lot in all the elements, because it's a bit of a minefield. But for something like you kind of had two options with insurance, or I guess like three options really. So Love of Wild's a bit different because we run so many events now, and we run so many overseas events and UK events. So you can set yourself up as a tour operator. It's really expensive to do this. But what that means is then you have full cover to organize the three areas of event planning, which is event delivery, which is providing a service such as rock climbing lessons or hiking, providing accommodation, and then providing transport. So the general rule is that if you do 2 out of 3, you're considered a tour, or it's considered that you're delivering a tour, and therefore you need a higher level of insurance than if you're just doing one, such as I'm organizing a day hike, but I'm not going to organize transport and I'm not going to organize accommodation. So legally in the UK, if you're doing 2 or more of those things and you're grouping them together, then you're delivering a tour and you need tour level insurance. So one way you can get around it is, it's a bit of a faffy way of doing it, but sometimes our volunteers do it like this, is to get the participants to pay the accommodation directly. So you can organize all the activities, and then when it comes to the accommodation, they have to pay that separately and book them. And that's like a way around it. You can get insurers that will cover you for one-off events like this one. And I often suggest just searching for things like festival insurance or retreat insurance, events that will be similar, because we're obviously working in quite a niche space. There's not many insurers that are like specifically for event companies. But yeah, if you search for those, you can then get a quote. And if you're doing a one-off event, then the insurance shouldn't be too expensive. So I just wanted to mention that. Yeah, just so I've like said it and mentioned the fact that like really for running an event, you need to make sure you're insured so that you're covered and your providers are covered, but also the people attending. Oh, and the third option I was going to mention is that you use a third party. So you could use, let's say you're using someone to deliver your rock climbing lessons, you can ask them if they are insured to also book the accommodation, and then they take all the bookings themselves, if they handle the money, and you just take your fee if you're taking additional fee for your community, for example. So that's like your third option. So then you don't even need to touch insurance and it's on someone else's shoulders. So the first thing I do when I have an event idea is go and create a big spreadsheet. And I love using spreadsheets, and they're so great, especially if you're working in a team, because they can be like updated and other people can access them. And I actually like to begin with a schedule of events and how you're going to plan your weekend. So Sidra's doing a full weekend, so she'll need to think about like travel. Is she including food? Is there going to be an activity after food? What time are they going rock climbing? There's like lots to work out. And actually, if you start with the schedule, it will then make you realize the different areas that you need to plan and what's maybe too much. I think if you start by just saying, oh, we're going to have a speaker, we're going to do a game, we're going to do this, before you've actually worked out how that's going to slot into the weekend, you can end up trying to do too much. And once I've got that, I will then create a list, a budget, sorry, of all the different costings involved. And remember, as much as possible, to include your own costings. So if you're putting time into it, it's okay to pay yourself to organize that. And then from that, you've got your budget and how much money it's going to cost you to run. And then the next thing I do is create a long list of tasks. So think of everything that needs to happen, from booking to selling the tickets, to creating a schedule, which you'll send out to everybody, sending out emails before the event so everyone knows what to expect and when to turn up. And next to the tasks, I will then order them and create a timeline. So I know when that needs to happen. So something's quite obvious, like, if you're emailing your attendees, you'll want to do that probably about a month in advance, I tend to do, which is when the questions come in. And it's really good to think about the experience from the people that are booking on. So, if I am a nervous first-time climber and I'd signed up to Sidra's event, I will probably about a month before be looking in the diary and being like, oh, it's a month away. And that's when I start to think, oh, I need to sort out like accommodation and clothing and things like that. And the 1 month mark is when the questions, I hate it, all the emails come in. So always try and get there first before the emails come in. It will reduce the time that you're spending on event planning. We also talked a little bit about food. I've always found food to be quite annoying with events. If you are booking out, you know, one of YHA's brilliant places, we often have food included, and then you don't need to think about it. But obviously that can come at a bit more of a cost than if you do it yourself. If you do it yourself, you should get, I think it's called level 2 food and hygiene. There's like this little qualification you can do, which you're meant to do if you're preparing group food. It's not that expensive to get, and it's really just a tick box qualification, but it will make sure you're covered if you're planning to like cook anything yourself for groups. We've also done it before where we ask everyone to pitch in and help, and this can be quite nice, especially to create a feeling of community and people coming together. One thing I would say about that is making sure that you're setting the expectations before. So it's very clear that if you want people to pitch in and help make something, that they don't turn up and expect it to be served. As much as possible, we try and lean on camping events over bunkhouse. Obviously, that's not possible over the winter, but if in summer you can camp, the great thing about that is then people can just bring their own food, and it's nice and easy. So let me go back to my spreadsheet and I'll show you. Yeah, I wanted to show you, this is like an example of one of the schedule of our events. So one of our most popular events that we run are called, what we call them, Wild Weekends. And we have several of them that we run a year. We've got a Wales Wild Weekend. We've now got one in Scotland, a couple in England, and a Winter Wild Weekend. Our Wales one is very cold water swimming themed. Our Scotland one is very hiking themed. So they all have themes to them. And they're basically, I describe them as mini festivals. So we have about normally around 70 women attending, and they're brilliant fun. There's always talks and lots of, you can see all these different workshops that are happening at the same time, so the women can choose what they want to join and take part in. There's always some wellness like yoga, and then we have on the Saturday we normally have a big group game together, and then we have like an open mic session which we call Wild Words, and this is a little ritual that we have at every single Love Her Wild event now. So whether you're booking onto an overseas expedition or you're doing an adventure in the UK or an event like this, you can always expect there to be a Wild Words. And it's something really special that all the women love. And we find that the women really open up and share stories. So they can use the open mic for whatever they want. We've had someone do like belly dancing, someone do like a comedy sketch, but usually it's just women standing up and telling stories about their lives. And this is like what a schedule would look like, and it's really good. I use Canva, and if you are a registered nonprofit, you can get Canva Pro for free, which is amazing. And I would suggest creating a template, because then each time you do an event, you can just make a copy, and then it looks nice and branded and has a similar look. And then it's really easy to just change the timings and the activities as you go. So then you've done all your logistics and your planning, and now you're booking. Sorry, now you're moving into the booking stage. And this, I think, is the scary bit. This is the bit I'm always like, oh, do I really want to go for this? So the booking stage is where you're actually like, okay, I've checked with the accommodation, they've got availability. I've checked with the provider, everyone's free. Now I'm actually going to book. So the biggest question you want to ask is like, how much of a risk are you taking at this stage? And Sidra has done an amazing job of getting funding. Well done. It took me years to work out that people will support your community, and that's, you know, you can ask for things like sponsorship. But if you get funding, it's great, because basically it takes the risk out. So Sidra's event will be subsidized thanks to the YHA. So they will be supporting the event. And you know, she's used that same method before with previous adventures, with the previous events that she's organized, which means that the people signing on don't need to pay, or pay very little, which is obviously fantastic to be able to offer that to your community. Like for a lot of us, or for a lot of your events, that might not be the case, and getting funding might not be an option, in which case you will be paying for things like the accommodation up front, and then you will need your attendees to cover the costs. So it's really important at this stage that you actually understand the cancellation policies for everyone that you're giving money to. So I always make note with any accommodation that I use what their cancellation fee is. So normally you pay a non-refundable deposit, and that's the money that you risk losing if you don't get enough bookings and the event doesn't go ahead. But often they will have a cancellation cutoff that if you cancel before then, you just lose the deposit, and then if it's after, you end up losing a lot more. So it's really important that you keep this in mind, so you know how much of a risk you're taking, and you can weigh up whether it's worth it. I always take a deposit for events, even if your event is fully funded. You should take a deposit from your participants. So the dropout rate for, I mean, I think since COVID, the dropout rate has doubled, if not more. I think I've really noticed that, and we've really noticed it in the Love Her Wild community, that since the pandemic, people are flaky as. So they say they will go, and then they will not show up. Even if you add, like we tend to use £35 because we've tried lots of different pricing. If you do 10, 15, £20, it's like not enough that people care. £35 just feels like that little bit extra that people care. They don't want to lose it, and they think twice before booking on. So take a deposit, even if it's a fully funded event. Even if you want it to be free, you can take a deposit, and if they turn up at the event, then they get it refunded. So this is normally how we run paid for, you know, funded events, or if we offer free spaces and things like that, we'll often have a deposit which can be refunded if they turn up, and it makes a massive difference to your dropout rate. So generally, like dropout rate, they say for any event is around the 10% mark. I think since COVID, it's more like 20%. If it's free, you're looking at more like 50%. So that's massive. So imagine you've organized this, and, you know, Sidra wants like 10 people on this event. If she does it completely free and doesn't take money, the chances are half of them aren't even going to turn up. So yeah, always take a deposit. And then you also need to set your own cancellation policy. So over the years, I've become stricter and stricter with our cancellation policy, because it just is so time consuming dealing with dropouts, and people cancelling, trying to refill spaces and things like that. So we always have quite a hefty non-refundable deposit on all our events that we run. And we're really strict that there's no cancellation and there's no transferring of spaces. In reality, if someone contacts us in enough time for an event and they say they can no longer go, we'll give them the option to move their booking onto a different event that we're running. But since we've put in place a stricter cancellation policy, we've noticed that there's been a lot less time wasted on trying to refill spaces and dealing with dropouts and things like that. So you can feel a bit mean doing it. And obviously, you know, if someone has like a legitimate reason, we'll work really hard to try and find like a solution. But, you know, in most cases, the reality is it's just most people being a bit flaky. Okay, so then we go on to the selling spaces. And actually, Sidra, would you mind just jumping on again and telling everyone how you sell your how you sold your previous trips for events you've done?
So what I did with the previous trip, so we advertised it on the actual on the WhatsApp group. So it was advertised on the WhatsApp group. We did a form to see who would be interested in coming. I also targeted specific people, just encouraged them to sign up. because I knew that there were barriers there within the community. So that's how we did it. People paid a non-refundable deposit of, they paid £50 for the trip to Portland and £20 for the trip that we had last week to the Peak District.
Yeah, brilliant. So I always suggest, here's like the order of how I sell a trip, and the best way to sell spaces is direct, and that's exactly what Sidra was doing. So she uses a WhatsApp as her platform, as her main platform for her group. We use Facebook as Facebook groups as our main platform. So that's contacting people directly, saying sorry, that's the Facebook is more under social media, but with WhatsApp it's very direct because everyone will read it. What I meant to say is we have Facebook groups, so our local communities has Facebook groups, and that's the direct way of selling. So you're putting a message out directly to your people that it's relevant to, and saying, we've got this trip, do you want a space? I, as a habit, try and send an email out to previous attendees. In the beginning, it would be like anyone that's been on any of our trips. You don't want to keep doing it, but you can do it once, one follow-up after an event. But if, you know, we were doing the Wild Wales event again, I might email the people that came last year and let them know, oh, we've just opened bookings. Do you want a space? Jump on quickly. I try and keep waiting lists. So that's really a great tool, especially if you're a little bit nervous about running an event. So or a bit unsure about running an event. So I did this a lot in the beginning when I was doing bigger overseas events. And there's obviously, you know, talking about that risk involved. The risk was a lot higher because there's a lot more money involved in bookings and deposits and things. So I would put a message out in the Facebook group and say, we're thinking of organising Arctic expedition to Norway. Who would be keen for this? Would you like to go on the waiting list? And then if I saw that I got 50 responses of people keen, I would collect those emails and create a waiting list. You know, reality is probably 10% are genuinely people that would be interested, but it gives you a bit of a sense, and it also gives you a list of people that you can email directly that have already said, I'll be interested in this. And then people that are shown an interest. So, you know, I always remember if I'm on an adventure and someone says, oh, I want to come to one of your wild weekends, I might then mention it directly. Oh, we've just, you know, we've just opened bookings for this new one. And that direct selling is the best way to fill spaces. And then second to that, I'll then move to social media. So we have our newsletter, which I must have like 25,000 subscribers now. So we've got a really big base on that newsletter. And it's a great way to sell spaces on our events. And then we also post on all our social media platforms. So alongside our Facebook groups, we have a public Facebook page and our Instagram page. I can't be bothered to use any other social media. I find the two is more than enough. And then let's say that doesn't work. I will then lead on wider networks. So that's asking others to share. So, you know, we're in like all the elements. Sometimes people do it. We've just launched this event. Would you mind sharing it? Do you know anyone who owes you a favor? Can you ask them to give it a plug? Are there other newsletters? You know, someone like Alistair Humphreys does like a newsletter every couple of weeks or something. He often puts events in there, interesting events. Who else could help you spread the word? Under that might also be press. If you're doing something really interesting or different, could you contact local press? And then the fourth and final step, if it gets really desperate, is to use adverts. You know, really that's your last port of call because adverts cost money to run. I've actually only ever done it once for an event, for an overseas expedition, and we were really struggling to sell our last two spaces, and we really needed them to go to make it viable. So I ran adverts and it worked really well. So Facebook and Instagram adverts, and probably spent, I don't know, maybe a couple of £100, but you know, it was for a big overseas expedition, so it brought in a lot of money for the community. So it was definitely worth the money that we put into it. And like, you could incorporate adverts into your plan, into your budget, if you know, if perhaps you haven't yet got a big enough audience to sell through the other ways. But the great thing about the first 3 steps is that they're all free, so you want to lean on those as much as you can. I mean, the great thing about a community is that the more effort and time you put into community and growing your members and your activities, the easier this will get. So Love Her Wild is in a really unusual and lucky position that our biggest issue is that we can't meet the demand of the community. So like this year, for example, we launched our events at the beginning of the year, and almost entirely they sold out within a few weeks, which put us in quite an odd position. We actually went to the outdoor expo and we had a stall there and we're handing out leaflets and talking about our community and being like, oh, we run these amazing events, but actually they're all full, so you can't join them. But yeah, come join us anyway. So it's a nice problem to have, and you know, it took a while to get there, but it's a really it is also a problem, because now I feel the pressure of, okay, everyone's always asking us to run more, so we are going to run more next year. But yeah, my point is that as your community grows and you get more members, then this part will get easier. But before you're there, selling the spaces can be quite stressful and not that fun. Let's check how we did time wise. So remember the marketing rule of 7. I'm glad I put that on the bottom because I would have forgotten to say this. The marketing rule of 7 is that on average, someone needs to see or be reminded of something 7 times before they take action. So that's crazy. So, you know, I think a lot of people probably here in this group, by nature of being community leaders, will probably be the rule of 1. You see something, you think it looks cool. Oh, that looks like an interesting event, I'm going to sign up to it. But the average person needs 7 reminders to actually take action and to press that book button. So that's a lot of reminders, and it's really important that you keep that in mind, because when you're selling an event, even now I get it. I'm doing like a social media post, and then a week later I do another one. It feels like you're harassing people, and you're like, oh, they're going to hate me, they're going to leave the group. But it's not the case. People are very used to seeing the same content being hashed up. You don't want to, you don't want to bombard people like every day, like, buy this, buy this, buy this. But you do need to be consistent and regular. And if you do a post, you might get a trickle of people signing up to your event. Don't be put off. You just say, right, I need to do another post, and I need to do that. Don't forget, guys, about this. And here's a picture of how beautiful it's going to be. So you can do different posts and use images and different ways of mentioning the event, but you need to be doing it consistently and over again. And it's also really important to remember with social media that when you put something out, only a small group of your followers will actually see it. So if you have a Facebook page and you've got like 500 people following it, if you do a post, not all 500 are going to see it. Maybe 50 will see it, or if it doesn't get much attention, maybe only 10 will see it. If it gets a lot of attention, maybe 200 will see it, but not everyone is going to see it. So you want to do another post, because then different people will see it each time. So when you're looking at advertising and marketing your event, keep the rule of 7 in mind, so you don't feel disheartened when you put one post out and it doesn't sell out instantly, but also that you don't have that sense of like, oh, I'm pressuring people or nagging people. And now you've actually got to your event, and I always say, take a moment to breathe. I always forget to do this, because like you have this build up to events. You know what, I used to be so nervous before an event. I wouldn't sleep the night before, and then I would just be like in another dimension throughout the whole thing and so stressed. And yeah, like really full on, and then it would finish and I'd be wired for like a week. And now I am just easy peasy. I just, like, even with the relay, I was a bit nervous with the relay, but you know, as things happen, it's all fine. Whatever comes my way, everything's all cool. So I can organize events now, and it's all very chilled, and I don't get stressed and I don't get the nerves. But I always remember to take a deep breath before, because it's full on. Like, I think organizing events is one of the most full on things you can do. So here's just a few tips I wanted to share for any event that you organize. So the first is to expect dropouts, because if you go into it expecting it, you will put yourself in a really good mindset. I think dropouts are just the worst thing to have to deal with as an organizer, because you put all this time. It's like on your birthday party when you think no one's going to turn up, and then you're like half an hour from it starting, and then your mate's like, oh, I'm sick, I can't come, and then literally before you finish reading that, another one comes in, oh, sorry, I'm not going to make it. And you start to get this feeling of dread that like the party's going to be a disaster and no one's going to show up and no one likes you. And I get the same feeling with events, but now I'm very much like, expect the dropouts, and I don't give them any attention, because you're always going to get the dropouts, and I'm going to focus on the people that do actually show up. So go in with that mindset, and you'll do yourself a big favor. I always have a notebook and printed out paperwork. So when you are taking bookings, you should have you know, some kind of booking system, or some way to collect information such as next of kin, do they have any medical allergies, things like that. It's really important that you have all that information on you, so that, you know, if someone was to fall ill, you have all the information they need with you at all times. And having a notebook is great. So when I'm doing, if I think, oh, I should mention this later, I like jot it down. Delegate, this took me a few years to get good at, but in the beginning I would try and do everything, and it's exhausting. And then when you learn to delegate, you realize that you can take a breather, you can be a better event manager, and it helps the event run much smoother. So now I'm really good at delegating. I even got Soraya to delegated to with Soraya once at one of our wild weekends. I used to meet everyone in the beginning, and then tell them where to go, and do the whole introduction with every single person that arrived, which is crazy, because then you're also trying to keep on top of your speakers that have arrived, and someone's got a question about this. And I was like, do you know what? I can delegate. Someone else can meet them. So I asked Soraya to do it once, and I thought, this is Bella, because then that was like her job. She did an amazing job at meeting and greeting everyone, and then I could focus on any disasters happening behind scenes. I always give myself more time than you think you need to set up. I've made this mistake so many times. You think, oh, there's not that much to do, I'll give myself 2 hours. So always go double it, give yourself 4. And I wanted to mention the importance of your opening speech. I always put a lot of effort into what I say in the beginning. So you're going to have, you know, a few admin-y bits about fire drills, or how your meals are going to work, schedules, things like that. That's great, like you have to do it, but you've got a group of people who probably don't know each other, who are nervous, who I always have when I join an event, especially like if it's a weekend one on the Friday night, you've just come from work and you're a bit like, oh, I kind of don't really want to be here, I feel a bit uncomfortable, out of your comfort zone. If someone just does a dry speech and then they just leave you to it, they're really not sparking much inspiration. So I always try and do an opening speech that's got a little bit of excitement, a little bit of inspiration. I sometimes get people to like close their eyes and I play music, get them to take some deep breaths, to let go of their journeys or their work days. I often get people, this works so well, to turn to someone that they haven't spoken to yet and give them something to talk about, and give them 2 minutes to talk. And that's great, because then it gets people chatting to someone new, really breaks the ice. Introduce who you are. Don't assume that everyone knows you and knows your community. Someone might have booked on a whim, and then suddenly felt really out of place, because does everyone know each other? So, you know, bring everyone up to the same level, give them a little bit of inspiration, some excitement, and get them, get them energized, and get them feeling comfortable. So really think about that opening speech. I think it's I really think that those talks I give in the beginning make a massive difference. And I'll kind of come back to it actually when we talk about challenges, so I won't talk about it too much now, but that's also the opportunity for you to set your ethos for the weekend and what you want the feel of the weekend to be. Be strict with providers and timekeeping, because as things start to run over, it's a disaster. So I always really hammer home to anyone that's delivering anything, any speakers. If you got someone standing up on stage, I always tell them, if I raise my hand, it means you got 5 minutes left. You will always have the speaker that talks until the cows come home. And it feels awful to be like, can you stop talking now, please? But you've got to do it to keep things moving. So be a real stickler for timekeeping. And my final top tip would be to capture your event. And delegate this if it's too much for you to do. Get photos, get some videos. I've wasted so many opportunities of like capturing some videos and putting together a really awesome reel, but get good photos like the ones we got here. They're just amazing for being able to, share in the group, to help you plug your next event, to give some discussion points in your communities. Also, then if you get any press interest or anything like that, they want photos. So get used to capturing and getting the photos of moments from your event. And then post-event, we're almost done, so I'll just keep this quick. So after your event, take a breather. It was all good. You did well. I always give myself a day off. I always say that, I never do really. You should give yourself a day off. But the first thing I do is send feedback. Actually, one thing I quite often do is get feedback at the event, especially if it's a weekend one. So before, when you do your wrap down, everyone's going to pack away before they head off. You can literally just have pieces of paper and a box, and you ask them to just give feedback. And really, the two main things you want to know is, what did they love and what can you do better? Because knowing what they love means great, we'll do that again next time. So if they all love the talks, you're like, brilliant, we'll keep doing the talks. If you kept getting the feedback that there was too many activities, which I got from the first couple of wild weekends I ran, I was like, okay, strip it back. And since then, we've never had anyone say, oh, there's too much to do. So listen to your feedback. It's so valuable. And I think, especially in Love Her Wild, I've heard so many times that people saying, oh, I really love that you clearly listen to what the community is saying, you take that on board. If you can be organized, setting your next event straight away is brilliant. So you've all gone home on the Sunday, everyone's feeling inspired, this was the best weekend of my life, and then Monday morning you send an email saying, thank you so much for coming, you can get a head start on booking this. We're running another one of these later in the year, and you will capture, a big chunk of people will sign up straight away while they're still in the buzz of the last weekend. Send your thank yous to providers, to your accommodation. You want to keep those partnerships nice and sweet, and remind them that they like you. Even if you forgot to, I don't know, clear out one of the cupboards, or you left a bit of a mess somewhere without realizing it, just a simple email to say thank you and that was brilliant can go a long way. And then the final thing I do, which is such a good habit to get into, is I leave myself a list of notes. I actually tag it to my spreadsheet, because whenever I create a new event, I copy and paste all the information if it's the same event from the last one, and then I start editing and changing it. And at the top, I'll have a notes section, and things like, I brought 100 tea bags, only 50 of them, 50 of them was enough. Little things like that. I don't know, this would have been better if it was a bit shorter, or you forgot to mention in your notes before that the showers are only cold, or something like that. And putting it there, I'm telling you, your future self will thank you, because when you go back to organizing the next event, you would have forgotten everything like that. And those little things will just help you tighten up your future event organizing. So I want to bring it back to Sidra and her event, so I can take off PowerPoint now. Okay, so I asked Sidra what her biggest challenges were, and I think this is, it's really important to share, because I think often a lot of us will have the same challenges when it comes to event organising. And I was actually going to ask at this point if you wouldn't mind jumping on chat and sharing, if you organise events, what your biggest challenges is, or what your biggest challenge is. And it could be on a personal level, logistics, funding, I don't know what. Share what it is. If you haven't organised an event yet, what do you feel is going to be your biggest challenge? And if you can just put all that in your ideas in chat, that would be great. And I'll come back to those once I've shared what Sidra's two biggest challenge was. So the first was, she talked about in events that she's done before, she had this divide in her group. So her events are very much for anyone is welcome. Anyone that wants to try rock climbing, they might be really experienced, it might be their first time, but the idea is that anyone is welcome, and she doesn't want to make it specific to this level only. And there's actually great benefit in that, because then your more experienced climbers can help your inexperienced ones. But she said that what she felt was then the experienced climbers were getting frustrated. And then it was also a little bit of a feeling that perhaps because she was giving more time and energy to the beginners or the newbies, that the ones that were experienced were feeling a bit left out, or like she wasn't giving them enough energy. So and really that came back to, she also mentioned this sense of like creating a sense of community. So one thing I really know with Love Her Wild is that I think there's a few things I do to set expectations and to set the ethos. So to go back to what I said about doing an introduction in the beginning, that is massive. If you can start off with a really good introduction, but in it I literally stand up and I say from the beginning that like we are here to be kind to each other. Some people have never come to Love Her Wild before, some people have done lots. Like, please talk to everyone. We're not in competition. And if you see someone struggling, can you help them? And even just by saying it, you're just setting that expectations with your group. And I've noticed that since I started doing that, it really does trickle down throughout the event, and it changes like the ethos and the way people talk and treat each other. I think also setting expectations when you're selling the event, and being really clear about the fact that try and foresee those problems, that you're going to get different levels or abilities, and actually just being really honest about that up front, and be like, this is an event for every ability. So while we welcome experienced climbers and first-time climbers, please know that the purpose of this is for us all to get out as a community and to help each other. So saying that early on, I think, is really important. And the third thing I wanted to say about trying to create that sense of community is I talked about wild words, and that's become a bit of a ritual with Love Her Wild, and people expect wild words and they talk about it a lot. And there's something about having a ritual in your community that makes you feel a bit more like a club or a bit more of a membership. The other thing we've done is we've got like Love Her Wild patches, which our members go absolutely nuts for. And we use those quite a lot. So often in Wild Words, anyone that stands up to give a talk, we give them a patch, and they love that. So we've got our own little rituals and our own little things in Love Her Wild that people recognize, and they come to know as like a familiar Love Her Wild happening, or they love it. Quite often someone will share in the group because they spotted someone on a train with a Love Her Wild patch and things like that. So have a think about something you can have in your community, some kind of ritual, or something that ideally will bring everyone together, and that you can keep doing at all your events. And I think little things like that really can set that feeling of being part of a group and being a member. And also, you can think of things like t-shirts and branding, stuff that like visually bring you together as a community. The second challenge, don't forget, if you've got any challenges, to put them in the chat, and then I'll skim over them after this. The second challenge that Sidra said is how that she didn't really enjoy the event as much as she wanted to, and how do you enjoy it as an event leader? And I think it's quite a tough one to answer, because I think I look back to the early events and I'm like, did I enjoy them? And I was like, I think it was probably quite type 2 fun, where I wasn't really enjoying it at the time, but like afterwards I got the satisfaction of it going well, and bringing people together. I think the two biggest things that have helped me, it's very different now. When I go on an event, I have a great time, but I think the two biggest things is, one, I delegate. So having someone there who's got your back, that if something happens, you can just pull them aside and be like, oh my goodness, help, what do you think we should do, is massive. When you have to do that on your own, that's a lot of stress and that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. So delegate and bring someone on board to help you. And that should make a big difference. And the second thing is just to give it time, because I think the more events you do, the more comfortable you get at them. And you will start to enjoy them more, like the more you do and the more you go along. So those were Sidra's challenges, and I wanted to just skim through the chat and I'll see what other people are saying, whether there's any similar challenges. And then also after this we'll move to questions, so you can start thinking if you've got any questions. Like I said in the beginning, they can be about event planning, but I'm also happy to answer like general stuff about Love Her Wild if it's helpful. You think your sister would be interested in the swimming event? Great. We're just about to launch the one for next year. Okay, dropouts. Yeah, it's so hard. Yeah, and there's no, so really with dropouts, think about your deposit, think about tying people in with money, and that will make a big difference, and set that expectation. Dropouts are awful, and it's our biggest complaint with volunteers all the time, that they get so disheartened, but you do become immune to it. Like I just don't care now. Even if it's my birthday party and no one turns up, it's fine. I will eat all the cake. With time, you get used to it. It's fine. So a challenge around payment to participate. This is from Gina. I used to run a youth club that when I joined, the events were always free and often had 100% no shows. Yeah, I put in place between £5 to £10 payment, and demand sign up chart went through the roof. However, we had to balance out the success with making sure that those young people who wouldn't be able to make the payment, even if it was refundable, wouldn't be excluded. A challenge that I'm not sure we ever really resolved. Yeah, that's a really valid point, because, and it's amazing, you know, if you put a price tag on something, it becomes more valuable. So it's been proven that if you offer someone a product and in one room it's free and in another room it costs £50, more people will want it when it's £50. There's something about adding money to things that people think they're getting better value. So, but then you got to balance it out, because we're all working in communities where we want to reach people, and for a lot of people there's financial barriers. One thing I realized with Love Her Wild is that the reality is 90% of the people that come, maybe 80%, but I think closer to 90%, money's not an issue. That's not their barrier. They have barriers, but they're other ones. Like they can pay and they're happy to pay and they get good value. So don't be afraid to charge, and don't feel bad about charging. Like most of your members will be able to do that. And if it's that you want to find a balance, you can then have a small section of spaces which are free for the people that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. And since we've done that, we've found like a bit more of a balance, but still we found the free places, you still get those crazy high numbers or dropouts. So it might be that if we have like 3 free places on an event, I'd normally look to fill like 10 people in those, because I'd expect that many dropouts. So yeah, it's a hard one to balance, and I don't think there's an easy answer. So Saray said, on rituals we started playing terrible telephone hold music out online social, so I didn't talk through the whole silent. Yeah, I like that. That's a nice one. Okay, I run outdoor adventures and want to start organizing events in the UK and abroad. The biggest challenge we come across is attendance. funding has been a problem, but slowly getting there. Yeah, so try and think creatively about how you can market your trips. I think also it's a bit of a balance with communities. Like one thing I'd say with Love Her Wild is I put a lot of effort initially into just growing the community, getting the engagement on our Facebook groups. Everything we did early on, like the Everest Adventure is amazing because it was like really competitive. People had to sign up to be part of it, and they were only going to select a few, and people really wanted to be a part of that. So we ran a few of those before we started moving into paid for events. And I think, you know, maybe being honest with yourself that like, okay, we'll just do a couple of small events and we'll put energy into growing our audience and growing our engagement so that when the time's right, we can go in and start selling these big events. It's much easier to do it that way. And it can feel, I know it's a problem because you obviously want to bring in money, but if there's other ways you can bring in revenue for now, then put your focus into yeah, growing that excitement and that engagement. Patches, that's great. Yeah, anything like that. They love, honestly, they love a patch. It's like the Scouts. Okay, capturing photos, videos, good for post-event reports and future advertising, but how to manage approvals. I asked at the start if anyone doesn't want to appear on photos used on social. Rarely has anyone said this, but it does happen, how to handle it. Also, I've seen events offer a shared online Dropbox, people's own photos. But again, how do you deal with someone asking not to appear in images? So it's on our terms and conditions that we will take photos and they will be shared. But I will often mention it in the beginning, and occasionally you'll get someone that can't appear in photos. We, instead of doing Dropbox, we will have a Facebook event page, and we tell people to share photos in there, and we just say please keep them within the page, don't share them publicly. Getting more volunteers involved. One of the best things I did with getting more volunteers was to organize, we call it a Wilder weekend. It's a lot of wild going on in all our branding, but the Wilder weekend is a weekend away for volunteers and staff, and we have a lot of fun. We play like really fun games, we have like activities, we also do a bit of feedback and training, but they are brilliant fun, and the volunteers go away and they talk about them and they post about it's been the best weekend of their year, and then everyone sees it and goes, oh, I want to volunteer now. So yeah, make it fun for your volunteers, like give them something to celebrate. That the whole point of that weekend is celebrating volunteers. So I've really noticed since doing that, like the engagement of volunteers has gone up. And we make it like really fun. We give away like prizes, and you know, I don't know, we do all sorts of fun stuff and nice little treats to say thank you and celebrate them. Okay, so feel free to start dropping questions in if you've got general questions now. I think we're kind of moving on a bit from challenges. So really good information, thank you. 2 questions. How do you know how much time you spent organizing? Yeah, it's a tough one, that. I don't think, if I'm honest, I don't think I ever really track it. I'm really bad at things like that. So I will just do a general estimate that I think, you know, to organize an event is going to take X number of days. Probably the professional correct answer is the next time you do an event to actually track it. And then when you go for funding, you know exactly how many hours it takes you. But add a little bit of extra time in case, you know, there's unforeseen circumstances, like, you know, I've just organized an event and then the venue's just gone bust. So that's going to take like extra time. And why are you doing this part-time and not full-time? Yeah, it's a good question. So I was doing it full-time. I was doing it full-time plus for like the first few years. Love Her Wild was everything, and I put so much time and energy into it. And then when I started to delegate, it felt like a really good time for me to step back a little bit. You know, I love doing the other stuff as well, like the talks and the book writing, and I have a blog and things like that. I love doing that, and I really like having a balance. So I would much prefer to be working part-time on this and to have other people working with me. to run Love Her Wild and then have time to do other things as well. It feels like a much healthier balance. I also really like working with other people. So now I've got a team of staff helping me run Love Her Wild. I enjoy it so much more than I ever did doing it on my own, because you can really bounce ideas back and forth, and I just love seeing what they come up with. I'm a very hands-off manager. They have like a lot of autonomy. I let them run with all sorts of things, and that's worked really well. And actually, I've also felt, you know, we've been running for like 6.5 years now. I've also felt like, you know, my energy levels, my enthusiasm for Love Her Wild, not so much enthusiasm. There's only so many years you can put into a passion project. I've just felt like I don't give the community enough, like compared to the beginning. So it feels like the right time for me to keep stepping back a little bit over the next coming years. And I still want to be involved, but I want other people to step in and do more. And I think that's really good for the community, because I think new energy, new enthusiasm will mean more events, more initiatives, stuff that you just can't keep doing for 10 years. So yeah, that was my reason for dropping down to part-time. The Eventbrite would charge to use the booking platform. Yeah, so this is about using a booking platform. They do. Every booking platform takes money, and I just price that into to what I charge. Oh, one thing I wanted to talk about actually was like how much you charge for an event. And I used to be like really on the borderline of like absolute minimum. We can just scrape by if everyone pays this. Like, give yourself a bit of breathing room. Like, what you're offering is valuable, it's amazing. If you need to make money from it to put back into the community, that's fantastic. They're able to support the community as well. So accept that there are charges involved, and as long as you deliver a great event, people aren't going to be complaining. Yeah, so account for that. It's fine to charge someone, just know that they're going to take a certain percent. Sometimes participants dominate conversations. Yes, always speak or always jump in when opportunities are offered. Any tips on how to manage situations so they don't swamp every opportunity and discourage others from speaking out? Yeah, it's funny, when I was reading that, a few faces popped up to mind. Yeah, I think every community's got them. It's really hard to manage. I think, yeah, it's a difficult one. How would I juggle that? I think like what I would probably do if it was in a small space is maybe being conscious about, is there a way that I can like actively give someone else a platform where it's not okay for someone else to jump in, like asking someone, would they mind like giving a short talk or something like that. I think I'm not sure I've got a really good answer for that. One other thing I would say is that on adventures and expeditions, if there's like an intense person, I will take, I call it taking one for the team, where I will consciously spend a day with that person, even if they're driving me crazy, and talking to them and listening to them all day long to give the rest of the group a break. And I've definitely done that consciously on trips before, where I thought, this person is driving everyone mad. The last thing I want to do is hang out with them. But maybe if you do that, it gives everyone else a little bit more space. Yeah, and maybe little things like, if you're sat around a dinner table, you could be like, oh, I just wanted to go around and hear from everyone one by one, like what you thought of the day, or to share something, and that way you're like giving other people to have a voice. But yeah, that's a tough one. That is a tough one to deal with. Right, I'll wrap up. We've only got like just under 10 minutes, so any final questions? Going back to the start of the call, you started to involve more volunteers. So sustaining volunteers, yeah, really difficult. So one of my staff, actually I've got 2 staff members now who do this. Their job is just to manage the volunteers. They do quarterly calls with them, and then they organize the Wilder weekend, so giving them this really fun opportunity. And I think like they also have a private Facebook group just for the volunteers, and they really like that. sharing in that space. And another thing we do is every quarter they pick a local group that wins a prize, basically because they've done something special, and what they get is some money to spend on themselves, so that's really important, so they can't just spend it all on the community, so they have to take them and the volunteers out for a meal or for, you know, to the cinema, whatever they want, but they have to spend half the money on themselves and then they can spend half the money on the group how they want. That's been really successful. And I think doing little things like that, acknowledging your volunteers, recognizing them, giving them things that makes their job fun is really important. And how do you choose the people who come to work with you? Almost everyone that's working for Love Her Wild was involved in events or as a volunteer, and then I just like saw potential in them, thought they were amazing, and then asked them, and I don't think I've actually ever asked someone and they said no yet. So that obviously works really well because I can see that they want to get more involved, and I offer that to them. And you know, I have made mistakes with staff. I think what's quite good with the setup that we got, because everyone's part-time, they all have other jobs, or you know, like stay-at-home parents, or have other things in their lives, so it's not their main source of income. I think that takes the pressure off a little bit, so I think that's better, having lots of people doing part-time rather than one or two doing full-time. I think that's really nice for a community because the whole point is you have more voices and more ideas, but it also means if someone's a bit slack, not everything collapses. So that's worked quite well. But yeah, gut is a big thing. There was one person I employed that I was like, I'm not sure, but on paper they look great, and it turned out it wasn't great. So yeah, listen to your gut. How in advance do you plan an event? So I'm now organizing all the events for 2024. So in the next month, I will put up, I think we're going to do like 30 to 40 events, and they will all be put up. And I like doing it this way. I do it in 1 month. I like put it all up on the website, and then job done. So it's quite intense. I have a lot of dates in my head right now. But yeah, so what's that? That's, yeah, about 6 months to a year in advance, to get a head start. And now's a good time because in the new year, people are like starting to think about their holidays. So we get a head start now. We get a few early bookings, but really from like January, the bookings really start to come in between like January to like May time, I'd say. Okay, this is the last question, which is good, timed that well. One of the things you mentioned at the start, you were struggling to delegate. How did you learn to do this? Yeah, it's a good question. How do I learn to delegate? Yeah, it's really difficult. I think like just making a conscious decision, because when you're like leading and running something, you're so used to just doing everything yourself, and people are really annoying. like in terms of like dropouts or doing what, everybody's annoying. Like I've just accepted that that like, you know, working with people comes with annoyances, and you just have to look past that. And you also have to stop being a control freak and trying to control everything. And I think my style, I don't think it would work for everyone, but I think it's been amazing for me and for Love Her Wild. I got people on board and I trusted them really quickly to do jobs and to have a lot of freedom. And so things like budgets, I will give them a chunk of money, and I just don't care. Like I trust that they're going to do a good job. They don't need to get stuff signed off. So things like that I think are really important, because if you give people autonomy and trust, then they feel that and they're going to do a good job. And then if they do a good job, then that builds your confidence and you can take a breather and say, okay, I can trust them. But I feel like it was a really conscious choice in the beginning, that I was like, I can't keep going at the speed I'm going. We're growing too big. It's getting out of control. I need help. So I would say, you know, practice next time you have an event. pick a few things that you're going to delegate and practice asking someone, and you'll probably be surprised that they don't mind doing it. They probably enjoy doing it, and then say that they're quite happy to come back and help again. So yeah, delegate, but remember, don't be a control freak, don't micromanage, give them space, listen to other people's ideas. I know you're the only person that's right, but you're not really. So let go of that thinking, take other ideas on board. The more you do that, the better your community will be. And don't forget to be super grateful for anyone that gives you time, anyone that gives your community effort. Make them feel valued, send them thank you cards or gifts in the post afterwards, keep reminding them they're amazing. And those techniques seem to be working really well for me. Cool, so I think that's it. I mean, if anyone has any follow-up questions, my email is bex@loveherwild.com, so you can just send me an email. I'm very happy to answer questions. Thank you, Sidra, for sharing your challenges, and honestly it sounds like you're pretty much on it with your event anyway, but yeah, good luck. I look forward to seeing what you do with that. But yeah, thank you very much, Soraya and Gina, for having me.
No, thank you. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise. We definitely had plenty of questions, and I'm sure even more in the background, which is why it's amazing that this event is paid for by the Sport England Together Fund, which is wonderful. And in addition to this event itself, we actually have some additional funding to be able to offer one-on-one calls with Bex. So if anybody would like a one-on-one call with Bex, we have a limited number of those available. And we'll be sending out a follow-up email after this event with more information on how you can book those. And if anybody is watching the video, these are available until, Gina, I'm going to say, I don't know the timeline. When can we offer the one-on-ones until?
They have to be delivered and sorted with the funding and everything mid-October at the absolute latest. And that's already me pushing it. So be quick.
Yeah. So if you want one, be quick and jump on the email. If you're watching this back on the YouTube before that deadline, then drop me an email on hello@alltheelements.co, and we'll be able to look into that and sort it out for you. I think this is our official last session in the Resilient Communities series. Yeah, Gina's nodding. We're hoping that we will have more funding to run more of these again next year, and we will be sending a feedback form. We'd really appreciate your feedback on this event, any of the other events that you've been to in this series. As Bex said, feedback is really, really important in order for us to know what you want and what you need. You can find out about future All the Elements events on the All the Elements website. Gina, do you want to say anything about Outdoor Citizens?
If you're already connected to Outdoor Citizens, then you'll hear what's going on directly from me or on the Facebook group. And if you're not and would like to be, please, I'll just drop my email into the group now, into the chat now. Or contact Soraya if you miss it.
Wonderful. So I think with that, another massive thank you to Bex for running this session. And we will bring this session to a close and let everybody go off into their evening thinking about all of their amazing events they're going to be organising.